The desert has always held secrets. Its winds move like whispers across the sand, carrying stories too heavy for daylight and too strange for ordinary belief. To look out at the Nevada wilderness at night is to face an ocean of silence, an ocean stretching endlessly beneath the stars. And somewhere, hidden past the fences and warning signs, there is a story that refuses to die, a story that begins not with governments or generals, but with one man. His name was Bob Lazar. For most of his early life, he was unremarkable. A tinkerer, fascinated by machines, drawn to wires, rockets, and the thrill of building things that could spark, hum, or explode. He wasn't the kind of man who sought fame. He wasn't the type who wanted his name written in headlines. In fact, he blended into the background. A curious mind tucked into ordinary surroundings. Born in 1959, raised in Florida, then drawn westward in the 1980s. He found himself in Nevada, a place that would change everything. It was in those dry, endless lands that Lazar would claim to see the impossible. Not through dreams, not through second-hand rumors, but through touch, sight, and work. Work he said the world was never supposed to know about. And when he finally spoke, when he chose to break the silence, the world would never look at the desert the same way again. He came forward under the shadows of anonymity, his face hidden, his voice altered, his name replaced with an alias. He claimed that behind the veil of secrecy, just south of Groom Lake, near the infamous Area 51, there was another base, a place he called S4. Inside, Lazar said, were not one, but 9 spacecraft. Craft not built by human hands. 9 machines waiting in silent hangars carved into the mountainside. His job, he said, was to try to understand one of them. Not to fly it, not to command it, but to study it, to reverse engineer the secrets hidden in its walls. The propulsion system, he explained, was unlike anything modern science had ever touched. No engines, no fuel tanks, no wings, no exhaust. Instead, it bent gravity itself. It ran on something unheard of at the time, a mysterious substance called Element 115. Element 115, Lazar insisted, wasn't just fuel. It was the heart of the impossible. It could generate gravity waves, distort space, and allow a ship to fall through reality instead of traveling across it. The craft didn't move like airplanes or rockets. It didn't cut through air. It warped the fabric of existence, making the distance between 2 points collapse until the journey was instant. He described it calmly, not like a dreamer, not like a fantasist. He described it like a man repeating his memories, step by step. He spoke of the shape of the hangars, the scanners that read the length of bones in a worker's hand, the layout of the craft itself, with ceilings far too low for ordinary humans. And in every detail, there was an eerie precision. Some called him a fraud. Others said he was telling the truth, but being used as a pawn in a greater game of disinformation. But whether you believed him or not, Lazar's words spread like fire in dry grass. Suddenly, Area 51 was no longer just a rumor among pilots or a whisper in UFO circles. It was front-page news, and the man behind it all had nothing but his story. No degrees to prove, no papers to defend him. His past seemed erased, scrubbed clean, as though someone had pulled his file and fed it to flames. Did the government wipe his records to discredit him, as he claimed, or had he never truly been the scientist he described himself to be? That is the tension of Lazar's tale, the place between fact and fiction, where shadows blur the edges of the truth. But perhaps the strangeness lies not in the contradictions. Perhaps it lies in the persistence of the story. Because for more than 30 years, people have returned to Lazar's words, picking through them, questioning them, defending them, testing them against what science knows and what governments deny. And somehow, the words still linger. The desert has a way of keeping things buried in sand, hidden in stone, erased from records but not from memory. And if Lazar's testimony was fabricated, it is remarkable how often reality has bent itself to match fragments of what he said. Hand scanners, once dismissed as fantasy, eventually appeared in photographs. A mysterious element, once laughed at, became part of the periodic table. Craft described as silent, sudden, and inertia-defying began appearing in Navy pilot footage decades later. Maybe coincidence, maybe confirmation. But what can't be denied is the atmosphere his story creates. When you imagine those hidden hangars carved into Nevada rock, when you picture 9 machines lined in silence, cold and waiting, when you hear him speak of a propulsion system that doesn't fly but falls through folded space, the image becomes impossible to forget. And that is why, year after year, this tale still draws listeners. Not because every line is proven, but because it asks questions you cannot shake. What if he was telling the truth? What if we are not alone? And what if the things we dream about at night are already here, hidden from sight, hidden from us? People drift to this story at night because it does more than entertain. It does more than scare. It settles into the imagination like a quiet hum. It raises questions you carry with you, even into sleep. And perhaps that is why you are here now, listening, because in the stillness of the night, with the desert winds moving silently across the sand, you too wonder. If you've made it this far, if you find yourself leaning into the mystery, consider staying with us. Subscribe, not just to catch the next story, but to keep walking deeper into these shadows where few dare to tread. And if you have thoughts, doubts, or even your own encounters, share them. Speak them aloud in the comments below, because in stories like these, every voice shapes the echo. Bob Lazar wasn't the first to whisper about secrets in the desert, but he became the loudest echo. His words turned Groom Lake and S4 from invisible places into symbols, symbols of hidden knowledge, symbols of truths too big for official acknowledgement. The years have done nothing to silence him. Skeptics still shout, believers still defend, and through it all, Lazar remains calm. He repeats the same story, never bending, never breaking. And in that calmness, there is either a remarkable liar or a reluctant witness. The difference is for you to decide. But tonight, as you drift into the space between waking and dreaming, let the desert hold you. Let the silence remind you that some mysteries are not meant to vanish with time. Some grow larger in the dark. And as we follow Lazar deeper into the Nevada night, past checkpoints, cameras, and fences, we step into the threshold of S4, where the extraordinary may just be waiting.
The road to secrets is not marked on any map. Bob Lazar described his journey to the hidden base as a passage into another world. He spoke of background checks so deep they scraped through his life like knives. He told of polygraph tests, endless security clearances, and the kind of silence that swallows even casual conversation. From the outskirts of Groom Lake, he said, he was loaded onto a bus, the windows blackened, the route obscured. Only those who already knew the way could ever find it again. And as the bus rolled over dirt and stone, past checkpoints, past the edge of the known, Lazar sat inside, his view sealed shut, being carried into the belly of S4. When the doors opened, the mountain itself seemed to breathe. The hangars were camouflaged, carved into the rock so cleanly that nature itself seemed to fold around them. To the unknowing eye, they were cliffs and stone faces, but to those who passed inside, they opened like the gates of another reality. And within, Lazar saw them for the first time. 9 craft, 9 machines of different shapes and sizes. Some gleamed like the classic saucers whispered about in late-night tales. Others were strange, organic, bending light as though the air itself bent to their will. But there was one that caught his eyes, one he was assigned to study, the sport model. It sat like a predator at rest, compact, sleek, metallic,
Its skin shimmered faintly, not like steel, not like aluminum, but like something that bent the light itself. He reached out once to touch it, and what met his hand was cold, smooth, almost liquid to the touch, seamless as though it had not been built, but grown. Inside, the proportions were wrong for human beings. Ceilings were low, seats were small, 3 or 4 feet tall. That was all the beings inside would need. The walls were smooth and curved, with no bolts, no wires, no switches. Just a single column rising from floor to ceiling. The reactor. And it was this column, Lazar said, that made the impossible possible. The reactor fed the amplifiers, 3 of them, arranged in a perfect triangle beneath the floor. They didn't push the craft forward. They bent the universe around it. The ship didn't fly. It fell into the warped gravity in front of it. To see it in motion was to watch the laws of physics break quietly. No thunder, no fire, no exhaust trail cutting through the air. Just a smooth drift, graceful and alive, as if the craft was slipping not across air, but through some hidden channel in reality itself. And at the heart of it all was the element no one had ever heard of in 1989. Element 115. Stable in the form found inside the reactor, it emitted no heat, no radiation. When bombarded, it released a kind of energy that could only be described as anti-gravitational. That energy was amplified, guided, and focused until the ship was no longer bound by Earth's pull. Lazar didn't claim to fully understand it. In truth, none of the team was allowed to. The work was fragmented, compartmentalized. Metallurgy was studied by one group, control systems by another. Lazar was only allowed to see propulsion. The left hand never knew what the right hand was building. It was a design of secrecy, a web spun to keep any single person from holding the full picture. But even in that sliver of knowledge, Lazar understood what he was touching. This was not the work of rival nations, not the edge of human progress. This was something else entirely. He spoke of the tension inside the base. Guards at every door, conversations monitored, cameras following every step. No laughter, no ease, just a heavy silence pressing down on everyone who worked there. Rules were strict. Break them, and you were gone. No explanations, no appeals, just silence. And then came the demonstration. One night, Lazar was shown what the sport model could do. He stood in the desert, staring at the metallic craft. It lifted from the ground as effortlessly as a leaf lifted by water. It hovered, drifted, then tilted and shot off in a way no human craft could survive. It changed direction like a bird startled in flight, except there was no sound, no wings, no roar, only a vibration. A deep humming vibration that settled not in the ears but in the chest, a thrum you could feel in your bones. For Lazar, that was the moment. That was when he realized this was no hoax, no trick of lights. He wasn't being shown a fantasy. He was staring at something built by hands not human. The wonder should have filled him, but instead, unease spread through him like ice. Because the longer he worked, the more he felt watched, not just inside the base, but outside of it. He said helicopters hovered near his home, cars with dark windows parked silently on the street. And his thoughts, even the ones he spoke only at home, seemed to echo back at him through monitored calls and unseen ears. He began to fear that even whispers could end his life. And so, he broke the rules. He brought friends to the desert. They met one night, leaving the noise of Las Vegas behind. With him were his wife at the time, Carol, and a physicist friend named Gene Huff. Together they drove into the desert, guided only by his knowledge of when the craft would fly. Wednesday nights, he said. That was the schedule. They set up with binoculars, camcorders, and the kind of nervous laughter that comes before the unknown. The air was still. The sky was dark. And then it happened. A glow rose from behind the mountains. Silent, bright, hovering. It hung in the air, pulsing gently, then shot off at angles no plane could follow. It darted sideways, downward, upward again, smooth, fast, untouchable. It was exactly what Lazar had described. The group stood stunned, their shaky footage catching only distant lights against the black of the sky. But for them, it was enough. It was proof. Proof that Lazar wasn't telling ghost stories. Proof that something extraordinary was moving in the desert sky. They returned again the following week, and again they saw it. The light hovered, darted, vanished. Each time it confirmed what Lazar had said. But by the third time, something else appeared. From the darkness came vehicles, lights, soldiers. They were surrounded, names taken, cameras seized, and Lazar himself, pulled aside, shown transcripts of his phone calls. Proof that every word, every laugh, every whisper in his home was being monitored. The message was clear. Stop. His clearance was revoked. His involvement with S4 was finished. But the silence didn't lift. The watching didn't end. And with every passing day, Lazar felt the weight of a choice pressing on him. If he said nothing, the truth would remain buried. If he spoke, he might not live to see the end of the story.
That choice would change his life forever. Because when the desert grows too heavy with secrets, someone always breaks. Someone always decides that silence cannot last forever. And in 1989, Lazar chose to speak. He walked into the studio of George Knapp, an investigative journalist in Las Vegas. He hid his face in shadow. He gave a false name. His voice was altered, but his story was whole. He told the world about S4, about the sport model, about Element 115, about hand scanners and security clearances, and compartmentalized research. He told them about the craft that didn't fly, but fell through warped space. Overnight, the world had a new name on its lips: Area 51. The mystery was no longer tucked away in the desert. It had spilled into living rooms, newspapers, and late-night radio. And for the first time, Lazar's story belonged to the world. And here, as you listen to this story tonight, I'll ask you the same thing Lazar asked the world with his silence breaking. What do you believe? If these machines exist, if the government really holds 9 ships not made by human hands, what does that mean for everything we know about science, history, and our place beneath the stars? And if this story captivates you the way it has for decades, then stay. Walk further with us. Subscribe so you don't miss the next step deeper into the mystery. And share your thoughts, not just for us, but for everyone listening alongside you in this vast conversation. Because every time someone whispers their thoughts aloud, the story spreads. The echo grows stronger. The desert at night is never truly silent. Wind brushes across stone, carrying with it the weight of stories unspoken. For Bob Lazar, every whisper of wind felt like a reminder. The fences around S4 could keep him out, but the knowledge he carried could not be fenced in. And though the government had stripped him of access, revoked his clearance, and warned him with a cold severity, Lazar's mind could not let go. What he had seen refused to fade. He replayed the sight of the sport model lifting from the desert floor, the way it shimmered faintly against the dark, the way it tilted not like a plane, but like a leaf gliding on unseen currents. He recalled the hum he felt in his chest, the kind of soundless pressure that no jet or rocket could ever produce. And when he lay awake at night, every shadow outside his window seemed sharper, every sound more threatening. Strange cars idled on the street with their lights off. Helicopters appeared where they had no reason to be.
Conversations felt haunted by an invisible ear. He was not just a man who had seen something extraordinary. He had become a liability. Fear pressed down, but so did a different force, the need to share what he knew, the need to put into words what could not remain buried. So he told his friends, not just Gene Huff, not just Carol, more friends, people he trusted, and with that trust came a plan. They would return to the desert, again and again. Each time, they drove out to the edges of restricted land, just miles from Groom Lake. They carried binoculars, cameras, night vision scopes. Their anticipation was sharp, their nerves raw, and each time Lazar guided them with certainty, pointing toward the skies where he said the flights would begin. And each time they saw them, silent lights rising, hovering, darting across the sky in ways no human machine could follow. The first time left them speechless. The second time, convinced. By the third, their conviction turned into something heavier, danger. Because as their lenses tried to capture what their eyes could barely believe, the desert answered back. Vehicles emerged from the black. Armed men stepped forward from the dark, flashlights cutting across the sand. The friends were detained, their names taken, their film confiscated. Lazar himself was separated, led into a cold room where transcripts of his private phone calls were placed in front of him. Proof that nothing he said, not even in his home, was beyond the reach of those watching. He was told in no uncertain terms that he had gone too far. And yet, what choice did he have? To stay silent was to betray what he had seen. To speak was to risk everything. It was no longer just about machines in hidden hangars. It was about the weight of secrecy itself. When he finally decided to break the silence publicly, he stepped fully into danger. In May of 1989, he appeared in an interview with George Knapp. His face shadowed, his name disguised, his voice distorted, and yet even through the filters, his calmness carried through. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't eager for fame. He spoke slowly, carefully, as a man burdened with something he wished he had never been chosen to carry. He told the story of S4, of the hand scanners that measured bone length, of the 9 craft in their stone-carved hangars, of the sport model's smooth metallic skin, its child-sized interior, and its central reactor. He explained the amplifiers, the way gravity could be bent, the way space itself could be warped. He spoke of element 115, stable in the form he had seen, capable of powering a ship through the folds of space-time. To the listeners of that broadcast, it was not just a story. It was a revelation. Area 51, once a quiet rumor, exploded into the public consciousness. No longer a whisper passed between pilots. No longer a line scribbled in classified memos. Now, it was on the lips of ordinary people. And the government, for all its power, could not erase what had been spoken into the air. The reaction was divided. Skeptics pounced quickly, dissecting his academic records, pointing to the absence of diplomas, the missing entries in yearbooks, the silence of MIT and Caltech. They argued he had lied about his education, fabricated his history. They seized on inconsistencies, parading them as proof that nothing he said could be trusted. But others looked at different fragments. At Los Alamos, a phone book listed his name. A newspaper showed him standing beside a particle accelerator. Small traces of truth, breadcrumbs scattered across his story, hinting that maybe, just maybe, he had walked the halls he claimed to. And the more people dug, the more the questions grew. If he had invented it all, why had some of his fantasies appeared later in reality? Why had hand scanners he described in 1989 surfaced decades later in military use? Why had element 115, once dismissed, eventually appeared in laboratories, unstable, fleeting, but real? Coincidence, or the faint shadow of confirmation. The questions never stopped. And through it all, Lazar never shifted. His voice remained steady, his details consistent. He never embellished, never twisted his story to match new revelations. He spoke the same way in 1989 as he did in 1999, as he did in 2019. That kind of repetition unnerves people, because a liar bends, a liar adjusts, a liar changes their tale when the world challenges it. But Lazar didn't bend. He didn't change. He simply repeated, calm, unwavering, and for that reason, his story has refused to die. Imagine hearing this, not as a journalist, not as a skeptic, but as a listener at night, lying in bed. The desert stretching endlessly in your mind, the sound of silence, broken only by the hum of something beyond human comprehension. That's why this story lingers, because it doesn't just tell you about UFOs. It places you in the desert. It lets you feel the hum in your chest, see the lights rising in the night sky, and wonder if the silence outside your own window carries something watching you too. It pulls you not just into belief, but into curiosity. And that curiosity is what makes the story unforgettable. If you've followed the story this far, let me pause here to ask something simple. What do you believe? Do you think Lazar saw something that no one else dared to describe? Or do you believe his words were crafted, carefully designed to plant questions rather than answers? Leave your thoughts below. Because whether you doubt or believe, your voice is part of the conversation. And if you want to keep walking deeper into this labyrinth of secrecy, subscribe now. Join us as we move further into the shadows where answers might be waiting. Because silence only grows heavier when we face it alone. As the weeks passed after that first broadcast, Lazar's life became a storm. Journalists camped at his door. Friends distanced themselves. Threats crept into his life in ways both direct and subtle. But still, he didn't retract. He didn't retreat into lies. He stood by his words. And the world, whether it wanted to believe him or not, could not unhear them. That is the paradox of secrets. Once spoken, they cannot be sealed again. And Lazar had opened a door the desert could no longer close. When secrets are spoken aloud, they do not vanish. They ripple outward, carried by echoes, by whispers, by curiosity that cannot be undone. After Bob Lazar's first appearance on television, the echoes began. Some dismissed him immediately. Others leaned closer, replaying his words, asking themselves whether truth had just slipped through the cracks of secrecy. But for Lazar, the consequences were immediate and personal. His education was attacked first. MIT, Caltech, places he claimed to have studied, degrees he said he had earned. Investigators scoured records, checked rosters, flipped through yearbooks. No trace of him. No diplomas. No photos. No transcripts. It was as if he had never been there at all. To skeptics, this was the nail in the coffin. They said it proved the man was a fraud, that he had stitched together a fantasy, weaving credentials he never possessed to give weight to stories he invented. But Lazar answered with something darker. He claimed the records had been erased, deliberately, that the government had wiped his past to discredit his present. And when his employment records at Los Alamos National Laboratory also appeared to vanish, his claim gained an eerie weight. Because the deeper people dug, the stranger it became. On one hand, researchers found a phone book listing his name at Los Alamos. They uncovered a newspaper article that showed him standing beside a particle accelerator. Fragments, breadcrumbs, enough to suggest he had indeed worked there. On the other hand, nothing lined up neatly. No full transcripts, no clear history. His narrative was slippery. Always enough to intrigue, never enough to prove.
And that paradox became the shape of his life. The weight only grew heavier when his personal troubles surfaced. In the early 1990s, Lazar was arrested on charges unrelated to UFOs, aiding and abetting in a prostitution operation. To skeptics, it was confirmation. A man so entangled in dishonesty, they said, could not be trusted with claims of alien craft. But to others, it was evidence of something else. They saw it as punishment, as harassment, as the government pulling threads in his life until his credibility unraveled. To them, the legal troubles were not coincidence, but consequence. A man silenced not by bullets, but by discrediting. And so the division deepened. Was he a fraud, cracking under scrutiny, or a whistleblower crushed by forces far greater than him? Years passed, and Lazar faded from headlines. He moved away from the spotlight, started a business called United Nuclear, and built a quieter life selling scientific equipment, chemicals, lab supplies, high-voltage devices. On the surface, ordinary. But even there, shadows followed, orders delayed, packages inspected. Strange scrutiny for regulators and agencies. Was it coincidence? Or another layer of quiet disruption meant to remind him that silence was safer? He rarely spoke in those years. When he did, his voice carried no hint of theatrics. Just calm, steady repetition. The same story, the same details, always the same. And while skeptics accused him of rehearsing, of refining a lie through decades of practice, others saw it differently. They saw it as the mark of a memory that could not be shaken. Then came 2003. Scientists in Russia synthesized a new element, atomic number 115, moscovium. It existed for only fractions of a second before decaying, unstable and fleeting. But to those who remembered Lazar's words from 1989, it was a strange moment, a whisper of vindication. He had spoken of element 115 long before it appeared on any table of known elements. Coincidence? Or confirmation? Skeptics argued it proved nothing. The version synthesized was unstable, useless as fuel. But Lazar countered that the isotope he had seen was different. A stable form, something humanity had not yet touched, but something another civilization had already mastered. Again, ambiguity. Again, the mystery refused to close. And then, decades after he first spoke, he appeared again. In 2018, filmmaker Jeremy Corbell released a documentary, Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. The camera found Lazar older now, weary, reluctant, but still unbroken. He did not speak like a man seeking fame. He spoke like someone burdened, someone still carrying the weight of secrets too large for one life. Corbell described him as the reluctant whistleblower. Not a prophet, not a martyr, but a man who had seen too much and chosen not to lie about it. The documentary reignited interest. A new generation, many hearing his name for the first time, sat with his story. They saw him not as a myth, but as a man. And whether they believed or doubted, they could not ignore the calmness in his voice. He told the same story, unchanged, unembellished. And somehow, that made it heavier. One moment from that documentary still lingers. Lazar described waking one night to the sound of footsteps outside his house. A dark vehicle idled on the street. Moments later, the power in his home cut out. He never discovered who was outside or why. Maybe paranoia, maybe not. His wife spoke of the clicks on their phone lines, the sense of being watched, the stress of living in a quiet form of war, not with weapons, but with fear. And yet, despite all of it, he said he had no regrets. If I could go back, He told the camera, "I probably wouldn't change anything. I didn't ask for this, but I won't lie about what I saw." A simple sentence, but one that has echoed across UFO circles ever since. Because whether you believe him or not, that calm conviction is hard to dismiss. Maybe that is why his story has lasted. Because it isn't just about physics or propulsion systems. It isn't just about hangars carved into mountains or elements unknown to science. It is about the human weight of carrying something you cannot prove but cannot forget. It is about secrecy and the cost of telling truths that the world isn't ready to hear. And in that space between truth and doubt, Lazar's story lives on. As you hear this tonight, as you drift deeper into the desert silence, I'll ask you again, what do you believe? Do you think his life unraveled because he fabricated a story too bold to sustain? Or do you think it unraveled because he told the truth in a world built to punish truth-tellers? Share your thoughts in the comments, because this story does not end with one man. It expands through every person who dares to ask, who dares to wonder. And if you want to keep traveling deeper into the shadows with us, subscribe. Together, we'll continue peeling back the veil. One whisper, one story, one secret at a time. Because silence grows weaker when voices rise. The deeper Bob Lazar's story spread, the more attention turned to the science. It is one thing to whisper of hidden hangars in the desert. It is another to describe reactors, amplifiers, and fuels that bend the very laws of physics. And so the question was asked again and again, could any of this be real? Could gravity be manipulated? Could a craft truly fall through space instead of flying across it? Could an element unknown to Earth power machines from the stars? At the heart of Lazar's account was a reactor small enough to sit on a tabletop and powerful enough to alter reality itself. He described it as a device that emitted no heat, no smoke, no exhaust. It was not combustion, not magnetism, not electricity as we know it. Instead, it generated a gravitational field. It created a distortion bubble, bending space like a lens bends light. The amplifiers beneath the craft then directed that distortion forward, and the craft did not move in the way we understand motion. It simply fell into the well of warped space before it. It flew without flying. To watch it was to witness the impossible. Instantaneous acceleration, changes of direction that defied inertia, silent hovering without wings or engines. And the power source was the mysterious element 115. In 1989, this sounded like science fiction. The element had not yet been synthesized, had not been given a place on the periodic table, but Lazar described it calmly, insisting it was not theoretical. He had seen it, touched it, watched it power the reactor. Years later, when scientists created moscovium, element 115 was no longer fantasy. It was fact, unstable, fleeting, but fact nonetheless. And though skeptics insisted that Lazar's stable isotope was impossible, the coincidence haunted them. He had named the number long before laboratories did. Lazar admitted he never fully understood the reactor. How could he? He compared it to handing a motorcycle to someone from the 1800s. They might spin the wheels, touch the metal, marvel at its power, but they would not understand combustion, fuel injection, or engineering. So it was with him. He was a tinkerer, staring at something centuries ahead of human science. He sketched diagrams. He described waveguides, amplifiers, reactors. He explained how the gravitational distortion bent not just space, but time itself. Inside the field, time slowed. A different clock ticked compared to the world outside. If true, the implications were staggering. Interstellar travel was not just possible, it was practical. Energy crises could vanish overnight. Fossil fuels could become relics. Entire industries, entire nations, entire systems of power would collapse. And perhaps that was why it remained hidden. Technology that could erase scarcity, erase limits, erase control. Too dangerous to release. But skeptics fired back. Gravity, they argued, is not something humanity can manipulate casually. Einstein's equations described it. Decades of research probed it. Gravitational waves had only just been detected. And here was a man claiming that in the Nevada desert, machines were already harnessing it, like clay in a sculptor's hands. To some, it sounded like technobabble. To others, it sounded like truth. Because Lazar never spoke with the wild eyes of a fantasist. He spoke with the slow humility of someone who had touched something far beyond him. And that humility, that calmness, unsettled even his doubters. Over time, his words began to spark something unexpected. Engineers in basements sketched designs for inertial dampening devices. Physicists began whispering about exotic matter, negative energy, and wormholes. Fringe inventors experimented with magnetic fields, ion drives, and anti-gravity prototypes. Most failed. Some vanished into obscurity. But the seed had been planted, and Lazar, whether truth-teller or fraud, had become the man who whispered possibilities into the ears of dreamers. Even within military circles, his testimony lingered. In the years that followed, footage surfaced. Navy pilots chasing objects that defied physics. Craft that accelerated instantly. Craft that had no wings, no exhaust. Craft that moved like leaves in water. And the world remembered Lazar's words. They remembered the sport model hovering silently, darting like a thought. They remembered Element 115, and for the first time, the boundary between dismissed conspiracy and acknowledged mystery began to blur. Lazar himself never claimed to have answers. He spoke as a man haunted. He admitted the limits of his understanding. He repeated what he had seen, what he had touched, what he had been shown. And then he let the world do with it what it would. That restraint gave his story a strange power. Because in an age when lies grow louder and louder, a quiet voice that never changes begins to sound more like truth. And so, the physics of the impossible became more than speculation. It became a question. What if he was right? What if, in the silence of the desert, humanity had already glimpsed the future? What is the answers we chase in telescopes and laboratories are already hidden in hangars carved into mountains? As you listen tonight, think of this. How much of our world depends on what we are told is possible? How many doors have been closed in your own life because someone said that cannot be done? And if Lazar's story has taught us anything, it is this. Perhaps the impossible is only what we have not yet been permitted to see. If that thought stirs you, if you feel the weight of that possibility, join us, subscribe, stay with this story, because as each chapter unfolds, we step deeper into the unknown together. And share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think this technology already exists? Do you think it is hidden? Or do you think it is fantasy? Your voice matters. Every perspective adds to the echo. Because whether you believe Lazar or doubt him, one truth is undeniable. His words have refused to die. And in their persistence lies a kind of gravity of its own. A pull that keeps dragging us back to the desert, back to the hangars, back to the sport model shimmering under fluorescent lights, back to the hum that lingers in the chest long after the story is done.
The story of Bob Lazar is not just about machines or reactors or elements pulled from the stars. It is about the weight of carrying knowledge that should not be yours. Imagine for a moment being invited behind a curtain that billions of people will never see. You step through. You are shown a secret so vast, so incomprehensible, that it fractures the way you view reality itself. And then, you are told to return to your ordinary life, to your house, to your car, to your neighbors mowing their lawns. How do you live after that? How do you sit at a dinner table knowing that while the world talks of politics and sports, you have seen technology that rewrites physics? This was Lazar's burden. A life split in two, the ordinary and the extraordinary. In public, he was just another man, a tinkerer, a scientist, a curious mind. He fixed cars. He laughed with friends. He built fireworks for fun. But behind that was the shadow of S4, the memory of hangars carved into the mountainside, the smell of sterile hallways, the sight of 9 different craft resting silently, as if asleep. He once said, "It looked like they had just been delivered, not built there, not constructed, but stored." He described the floors sloping into the earth, the hangar doors blending seamlessly into the mountain, invisible to anyone flying past. And inside, shapes that no human had ever designed. One was sleek, like a saucer split with a ridge. Another looked like a teardrop frozen in metal. Some were small, compact, as if meant for one. Others were larger, vast, with room for many. Each had a signature. Each whispered of a different origin. Not one of them resembled our jets, our helicopters, our rockets. They were alien, not just in form, but in spirit. And Lazar was asked to help make one of them live again. The most famous of these, the one Lazar was assigned, he called the sport model. It was the one most intact, most functional, a craft that seemed to be waiting. He stepped inside once, no buttons, no screens, no labels in English, no writing at all. Seats too small for humans, a chamber that felt alive in its simplicity, curves that melted into each other, walls that seemed to grow rather than be built. It was not a cockpit, it was a presence. And when it powered on, it did not roar, it did not vibrate, it whispered, a deep, resonant hum that felt less like sound and more like truth vibrating through the body. Outside, when it rose into the air, witnesses described motion unlike anything human. No wings, no exhaust, no sonic boom. It simply was. There one moment, gone the next. Tilting sharply, but not falling. Moving at speeds that made jets seem primitive. And the strangest part? From inside, Lazar said, there was no motion, no inertia pressing against the body, no turbulence, no strain. The gravity bubble carried you as if the universe itself had become gentle. It was breathtaking, it was terrifying, and it raised a question too large to ignore. If these craft were real, then someone, or something, had crossed distances so vast our minds cannot contain them. Light years shrank into footsteps. Time itself bent like paper, folded by unseen hands. And perhaps they had been coming here longer than we could ever know. For Lazar, this realization was not a thrill. It was a weight. Because if it was true, then humanity was not alone, not special, not sovereign. We were observed, perhaps studied, perhaps ignored, perhaps something far stranger. And the governments that knew stayed silent. Years passed. Lazar faded into a quieter life. He opened a business selling scientific supplies. He kept building, tinkering, experimenting. But the shadow of S4 never left him. Sometimes, he said, it haunted his dreams. The image of the craft rising silently. The hum in his chest. The knowing that what he had seen was real. And the frustration that he could not prove it, not beyond all doubt. But doubt, too, has its limits. Because as the years went on, Evidence emerged that matched his words. Navy pilots caught objects darting across the oceans. Military radar tracked shapes accelerating in ways no known aircraft could. Eyewitnesses described craft with no wings, no exhaust, no sound. And through it all, Lazar's description stood unchanged. He never shifted the details, never exaggerated, never retreated. That consistency was its own kind of evidence. And so, here we stand, decades later, still wondering, still listening to the echoes of a man who claimed to walk where most of us never will. And maybe that is why his story endures. Because it is not just about saucers or hangers or elements that bend reality. It is about the human hunger for truth. It is about the ache of knowing there is more. More to the universe, more to our history, more to our destiny. As you listen, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, if tomorrow the government revealed that all of it was true, how would your life change? Would you look at the stars differently? Would you see your own struggles differently, knowing that distances of light years can be folded like paper? And perhaps most importantly, would you forgive yourself for ever believing you were small? Because if Lazar was right, then smallness is an illusion. Powerlessness is an illusion. The universe itself, it bends for those who understand how to command it. And maybe, just maybe, that is why the story of a single man in a single desert still grips us today. If these words reach you tonight, if you feel that pull, the pull toward mystery, the pull toward wonder, I invite you, stay with us, subscribe now, and join this journey into the unknown, because this is only the beginning. And if you've listened this far, share your thoughts below. Do you believe Lazar, or do you think the truth lies still deeper, still hidden, waiting for another voice to bring it into the light? We are listening.